It's not February, obviously, I'm on the wrong page, but April 14th, 2017, with a roll call, please. Here.
Vice Chair Hartung.
Here.
Director Bob Zine. Here. Director Herman.
Here.
Director McKenzie.
Here.
Director Martini is absent, but we have alternate Abbott.
Here.
We have a quorum, sir.
Okay, if you'll all stand for the pledge, and Ms. Herman, would you lead us, please?
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, we'll go to B, public comment. Anybody in the audience wishing to speak at this time? I don't have any cards. Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the authority. C, approval of the agenda for April 14th, 2017. That'd be today. Anybody want to pull anything or move it around? Looking for a motion?
So moved?
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
Sir.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. 1D, approval of the draft minutes of February 10th, 2017. Any additions, subtractions, deletions, anything?
Motion to approve.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. It passes unanimously. Announcements, clippings, Jay?
None at this time.
Okay, we'll move on to number 2. Discussion regarding expansion of the current gauge system to include creeks which feed into the Truckee River and other watersheds. And this would be to give direction only. Ed, how are you?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and board members.
Good morning.
Well, I'm doing pretty good. I think we all are. And obviously, winter is still with us. I was laughing last night. I was feeding the animals out at our ranch, and I was listening to the Aces game.
Identify yourself, please.
Oh, sure. For the record, Ed Evans, the authority, hydrogeologist. But anyway, I was listening to the Aces game, and all of a sudden they canceled the snow. I was in Washoe Valley. It was snowing, and this is very loud. And I started laughing. They started playing Frosty the Snowman as they canceled the game. So I guess we're in this for a little longer. What we're going to talk a little bit today is just an extension of what we touched on at the February TURFMA meeting. I think it was brought up that we do have, obviously, a flood warning network. And it was asked, is there ways to expand it? Is it robust enough to do what we're doing? I think Mr. Hartung asked for that. And so we're just going to continue that discussion a little bit today. We're going to start off with what you're looking at on screen is just a quick shot at the overall distribution of the network, kind of a shotgun pattern of gauges. And they represent maybe a rain gauge, a stream gauge, air temperature, or snow depth. We do not own all these gauges. We do share information with other agencies. Find if I have a clicker here. I don't want to put anybody's eyes out. Maybe not. Oh, that's all right. Just as I'm a good arm waver when I babble. Anyway, you can see that we are distributing or picking up information through the Sparks area, Spanish Springs, up along Peavine, the Truckee River corridor, and down through the south Truckee Meadows area and into Steamboat Creek. Okay, next slide, Danielle. We'll focus in a little more on that distribution of what were set up for precipitation targets when this network was established back in the late 1980s. This is just a screen grab, I believe, from a 7-day rainfall total, probably from last week. And you see, this represents a little more of what the gauges this authority funds directly and the staff maintains. We call it, they're radio-based, and you can kind of get a nice distribution of what's been going on. Certainly nothing like we saw in January and February, but if this thing
These
would
are
work.
just rain gauges?
Yes, they are, Ron. We're talking about precipitation or rain. Right there we go. Right there, that would be the Mount Rose, a gauge at Mount Rose Summit. We're moving down into the South Truckee Meadows area. Whites Creek, over here, Dry Creek, up in Alum Creek. Look at we have good spread through the urban corridor. Next, Danielle. So when this network was established, obviously we were very interested in figuring out the rainfall contributions to the Steamboat Creek watershed, and that would include everything out in Washoe Valley, and it was expanded over time. Next, please. We also focused initially on the urban corridor, especially the North Truckee Drain. We do have sites out. This, I think, is out by the Save Mart at the fire station out in Spanish Spring. There's a couple more off target, off the image. Sparks expanded this urban knowledge back at probably about 5 to 6 years ago, and we pass that information through this network. Without passing it through, you guys wouldn't see that information. Next, please. And then, of course, the Truckee River Corridor. Always interested in what's happening, even off screen, up in the Alpine Meadow Ski Resort, Squaw, all the way down the Truckee River Watershed Corridor, down into our community. So this was the premise for the distribution.
Ed, can I ask you a question on
You
this?
bet.
Are they collector gauges? How do they
Might be the next slide.
How do they work?
work?
We're going to get to that.
Okay.
So next, please. Here you go. The monitoring basics. On the left is what a basic rain gauge looks like. This is over in the Huffaker-Holcomb area in the South Truckee Meadows. Basically, this portion of the gauge is represented by this diagram right here. Rainfall falls into the tunnel at the top, fills up a threshold-driven mechanism. Basically, it's a gauge that's calibrated to hold about 1 millimeter of water. You can see it fills up. When it tips, it's like a light switch. Turn the pole switch on. It lets the logic information down in a radio transmitter, and the communication device lets it know there's rain. It goes out the antenna and comes back to a base station at TRIFMA and also to the National Weather Service. And we know, then we know 1 millimeter of rain fell at what day at one time, and it just keeps recording. They're very basic. It's a backbone of the system. Some are heated, so we get snow water equivalency out of them, which is really important along the Mount Rose corridor. And this is how the network started in 1988, and then we evolved into some better river stream flow collection, kind of they started out very simply, and as they evolved technology, we could start monitoring other parameters, and that's what we do. Next,
So
please.
Ed, thank you, Mr.
Sure.
Chairman. How does this gauge react to, Forrest Gump actually put it very well, sideways rain, they was upways rain.
Sideways
all
rain could be an
kinds of
issue.
rain. That was a great part of that movie, by the way. That's not
Well.
spoken in the pejorative. It's meant to say, how does it, if you have a 40-mile-an-hour wind and it's raining, how does that gauge work?
Good
How does it
question.
collect and know what the actual level of precipitation is?
A lot of the sites, we do have wind buffering screens. There may be a picture of one here, I'm not sure. And it is designed to cut that wind shear, so you have a deadfall over the top of the can. It's a little more important up in the mountain settings. Some of these lower valley ones, just because they can get vandalized, we don't use them, and we just count on, certainly in light rain events, and events like happened yesterday, this type of snowfall that comes in is very powdery, very light. It's coming in with high wind-driven backbone to it. We aren't going to catch everything. The beauty of what we went through in January and February, the rainfall intensity is so severe. The winds drop off with that heavy rainfall, and that's what we're interested in. So we feel pretty comfortable we get a very good representation of it, but they're not perfect. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, and I understand, and I wondered about that because on this particular image that you have on the screen, it does not show a windscreen or anything that would change the flow
diffuse that.
pattern around it, based on weather conditions.
And Ed, let me add one thing. These are regulation gauges that are basically approved for use by the Weather Service. You also keep in mind that the Weather Service is getting the same data that we're getting. So every time it pings and we know that 1 millimeter tipped, then that information goes to the Weather Service. Those guys can correct for sideways rain in their analysis. And they sometimes do that. It's up to them, again, how they use that information. But again, just the notion, Ed answered correctly, they try to design the gauges so they work, but also there can be some office corrections to that data once it's received.
And is there and I'm probably going to mess this up, I don't think I have the right term, is it a sphygmomanometer for wind speed?
We have used those in the past. At this level of type of operation, they're not the most reliable things. One, there's some really good guidelines on how high you should set one up for accurate
Well, the
gauging.
only reason I ask that is then if you once it's registering that there's a high rate of wind, you can maybe do some type of an offset calculation based on that wind reading.
You can, and I think Jay really hinted at it. In critical areas where they really need, we'll say up at the higher elevations like Squaw Valley, the top that the Federal Forecasting Office is at the River Forecast Center, they do bring that into some play. To tell you the truth, a lot of the effort, it doesn't change the overall level of precision needed to put a forecast out, we'll put it that way. If you wanted to get into trial, jurisdictional, legal action, perhaps you need it, but when we're talking about, are we worried about 5.5 inches of rainfall in 24 hours or 6? At that point, like on our side of the watershed, it doesn't really matter. It's probably going to have about similar impact.
Okay.
But we do have wind sensors, wind speed sensors, and that I kind of tended, we initially had some through this, through the TRIFMA network. Over the years, we just let that kind of evolve back into the federal forecast agencies. They need it more for the airport and stuff like that. So, but anyway, all good questions. Anything else on this critter?
Well, thank you.
Daniel? And then just to beat it to death, this is why we have these things. Here's a reconstruction of the 24-hour rain total in January 8th, and you can see the distribution worked well. Kind of plays into, Mr. Hartung, what you're asking about, how comfortable we feel with the numbers in such a heavy rainstorm. Feel really good about this. About the only one that's behind would be Davis Creek down in the bottom, and that changed, I remember, within the next 24-hour period. The heavy brunt of the storm switched them a little, just slightly more southern, and it began to catch up. Once in a while, we'll see funny things. What the wind does, it will put pine needles or debris into these instruments. They'll slip down the funnel, and that happens a lot, unfortunately, at Mount Rose now, which never did. But there are always issues in this data collection, but this is, again, why we have this backbone of precipitation. Next, please. So if rainfall is our primary, obviously right on its heel are stage and flow, the river height, the creek high, and the associated flow. Here's kind of the basic distribution. I just grabbed a snapshot of some of the USGS gauges in the network. Actually, ours are blended in too. And you can see, I don't know if this shows up. Basically, the 14 value and the 9.9, that would be Galena Creek, Whites Creek. The 2005 is a gauge we fund through our O&M with USGS 205 CFS. So you see, we're very heavy on the Truckee River corridor, which we're supposed to be, and we also are picking up some inputs from the South Truckee Meadow and up into Spanish Springs with the North Truckee Drain, the 2.5 CFS right up there. So if we really quickly, Danielle. Again, when this was set up, we obviously, Steamboat Creek was a target. Next, please. Obviously, the Reno-Sparks urban corridor, pretty much from the California border, which I think thanks to Tumwa, we do have the Dog Valley gauge, which is the 74 CFS. We have inputs there, all the way to Vista, down to Tracy now. And then next, please. And also, of course, we have to track the Truckee River. Certainly, other agencies are looking at this very hard, such as the Federal Water Master's Office, et cetera. Okay, next. Now, since you wanted to know how the rain gauge really quickly, this is what one of those looks like out in the field. This is the site we fund up at the Truckee River near Truckee. Very important site now. It's an official forecast point by the California Nevada River Forecast Center. So we started expanding all this. 1997, we had one of these out in the field besides the 2 USGS gauges. So there was not enough knowledge in 97 about what was happening on the Truckee. So the National Weather Service and at the time Washoe County, working with Reno and Sparks, the 3 of them, expanded the network. And these are critical for these forecasts. We'll take a look at one briefly in a second. They also, I'll show you why we need to watch things real time versus forecasts. This agency is currently funding 9 of these, either partially or completely. There is a lot of cooperation going on and sharing, and I think your annual cost is going to be around $120,000 this year. I'll be coming back in June. We are probably going to add back to the payroll for the USGS, the Galena Park gauge. We pulled it out for a while because of budgeting back in around 2010. We're going to have them start maintaining it again for us. Next, please. Quickly, this is what the inside would look like. The little corrugated steel instrument house, or gauge house on the left. If you were to break it down, kind of the same thing. You have the instruments about mid-door height inside, and basically there's 2 intakes headed directly out in the river, one for high and one for low flow. And that's pretty good reasons. This year we have high flow, last 5 awful low flow. So that's how you get water. The whole idea is to get inside that steel gauge house the exact height of the river outside without much fluctuation from wind or anything.
So, if I may, Mr. Chairman, I just have a fast question for you. You talked about budgeting and who pays for this stuff. Why isn't there more sharing, especially from the National Weather Service and the Federal Water Master?
There are, Vaughn, Mr. Hartung. It's just not every
call me
agency.
Vaughn. It's okay.
Yeah, right. Some of us are paying fully. We might have more of an interest in the Tracy gauge, so we pay for that entirely. Where I think the Reno gauge, the Truckee River at Reno, is almost entirely paid for by probably the Truckee Meadows Water Authority, and I think the Truckee Carson Conservancy District, or hanging back. There's a lot of players, but things changed a lot in 2000. After 2007-8, we almost lost a lot of gauges because people just held back funding. They ran short of funds. And our authority did step in and kept a few of them alive that we felt were important.
Well, I mean, I recognize how important this data is. I mean, all the decisions that we make have to be data-driven, and these are important collection points. And I would think that there would be more interest by a number of players, including the National Weather Service, for forecasting.
I think it just comes down, and the mantra. It's every agency has a budget issue, especially when it comes to instrumentation, so we try to pass it around.
Well,
and every year, the USGS tries very hard to find contributors to share the load.
Then it's no problem. We're happy to share the data at a cost.
Yeah.
It's just like my Verizon phone.
It's, I hear you very loud and clear. And I think a lot of the players in the room we've all had these discussions, and we're trying to keep the network. First goal is keep the network running,
Yes.
especially on the USGS gauges. And then every year we do revisit that. And it's not, your comment's not lost on my ears or
Well,
Jay's.
there's this attitude that data is free, and the collection of
Yeah.
data is free, and it really isn't.
It does cost. Yes, it does. All right, Danielle, next slide. And I'll try to speed up here. I just want to. I already forgot. Oh, we froze it up. Kind of not used to having a clicker. Oh, okay, now I have to ad lib. This is just, so where we're headed really fast, where I think now we get to your question, where do we think some very short-term targets will be? Okay, we'll touch on, this is the whole reason why we have live versus predicted. This is an actual forecast by the River Forecast Center that takes all this information. The blue line was actually what happened this is the Truckee River at Vista. Wow. Predicted is green. Why I sit there and watch all this, in the early stages, right there, that black line on February 7th, obviously, we thought it was predicted to go pretty high. It didn't happen. As we went farther along into that 3-day rainfall flood event, you can see things changed. And even if I'd have picked a later forecast, maybe 2 to 3 days later, you would have seen that green quite a bit, as Ron will remember, quite a bit farther above the blue trace. But this is why we watch it, why I sit in a room to see if what's coming in live is even how close we're following what's predicted.
And I think the Weather Service did a great job on the hourly and everything else. It didn't reach 19 or 20 feet.
Yeah, I think at one point it might have been around 19.8.
Yeah.
It was about a foot below, I think.
A foot below their prediction, but as far as the hourlies, how fast the river rose was amazing to me, I think.
It is, and I sit there and watch the same thing. That's what you're looking for. I'm looking for slope at that point.
Yeah.
Is it going slow or steep, and see how we're tracking. So that's why we always have to have some ears on this stuff, besides forecasts. Next one, please.
And this is why, by the way, that these guys work for the Weather Service and not William Hill on point spreads.
Yeah, that's true. It's very complicated. It takes a lot to get these forecasts out. So where do we go now? Just some photos, one of Jay earlier in his flood career. And anyway, next slide, please.
Jay?
This is kind of the where do I see immediately some targets? The green. We'll try to tie in a little bit. There are a couple opportunities to work with the Federal Water Master on some of their sites, basically along Steamboat Ditch. The lower green dot, kind of the right-hand lower corner, that's right around Steamboat over by the Rayleighs near Galena. That's a good location, maybe up closer to the headwaters, try to figure some stuff out before we head into the Reno corridor. So there's opportunities there. It's just we have to kind of share sites and have two different types of equipment working together. Probably, I do believe there's some opportunities in the Hidden Valley Steamboat Creek area, especially at the Southeast Connector. We're looking at the Boynton and Dry Creek in that area, especially leverage the advantages of some new bridges. I believe right by the airport, we have a good spot on Longley Lane that we probably should incorporate fairly quickly. And the purple targets, I've been conversing with HDR that did some of the dynamic flood mapping during this January event. These are basically creeks: Thomas, Whites, Dry Creek, Evans, Bailey Creek down below the Mount Rose intersection off on the Virginia City Highway. These would be useful in preparing more accurate maps for EOC use. So these are some of the low-hanging fruit where I think we can improve. We can't get them all in. Obviously, private land versus right-of-way, it's tough to find places to put these things. They're not big, but you still have to find somebody to participate. But this would be a very easy short-term goal to improve stream gauging certainly in the Reno Sparks, South Truckee Meadows basin. And next slide. And I'm about done, honest.
You're okay.
Hosed up. Okay, all this means, this is where improving prediction, I think, is the next step on all this as well. The dynamic flood mapping that HDR did during the January event, very incredible. If we can improve, like we just talked about, add a few more spots where we can better determine the proportion of flow coming in from around the Short Lane, Narrows, or Butler Ranch down to Clean Water Way, have a better handle for that. We get more accurate inundation maps in the UNR, Edison area, certainly for Sparks, and probably we can improve things certainly in the South Truckee Meadows area. So we want to focus on that. We're going to ask the River Forecast Center if they can't non-publicly give us some information on some of these drainages that we can pump in, basically a value, and help increase the accuracy again. My long-winded thing is we might be able to get a value that they calculated, but they don't put it out on their public website, and we can use it to refine flow coming into the mapping area. We also have the consultant-developed models that are being wrapped up. I believe in staff, we can leverage those a little bit to look at some of these basins that are a little below the resolution of what the federal offices look at. Maybe we can provide a little better, come up with more useful flows in some of these areas, maybe around the irrigation ditches. I think we can do some things with that, but we have to get the models in-house and play with them a little bit. And then regionally, we're going to combine to this. We're not the first community that has faced this. There are areas that are using proprietary dynamic models that kind of do a little of both this. They take some real time. They're not as complex as the modeling used to produce the EOC mappings, or the EOC maps by HDR, but we can do them in-house, and there's some very interesting things going on, like in cities of San Antonio. I think we should look at those. And if I think they're of interest, I'll bring them forward. And with that, I'd love to answer any questions you have.
Questions or comments?
Sir.
Mr. Hartung.
One of the things, thank you, Mr. Chairman, one of the things that I see of great importance here is as we model moving forward, and hopefully we can have some historic data and base that on how much development has occurred, then we can really look at what the impact of development is to the runoff, which is very important for us in terms of our planning.
I think that's been one of the goals in our office with some of our modeling. Jay can add more than I can on it, but yes, I believe you're going to see some of that reflected certainly in the current HDR mapping effort, and maybe the Kimley Horn product as well.
And what that allows us to do is place additional conditions on the developer when they decide to develop a specific site, because we have this historic data of rainfall in certain areas. And I know that it's not all, one year you're going to get it in the south and the next year you're going to get it in the north. It's not always consistent, but it does help us to create a more consistent playing field in terms of how development impacts the region.
Any knowledge is better than just guessing. And maybe that's what it's always good to take. This stuff just shouldn't sit on a box somewhere. We do distribute it. We do get calls for like, hey, what happened in this area to reconstruct things out in Spanish Springs, thunderstorms and that. So yes, it all can play into help getting a better picture as we go forward. Policy, it's up to you folks. But Anything else?
Yes, thank you.
Ms. Herman?
Would you have some shareable information like this? Something that you could email or?
Ms. Herman, you mean like how the gauges work or specific data? I can email about anything, I think.
Okay, yeah, I'm just trying to compare notes with some of the things that are happening in the North Valley flooding. And you know, the part about your gauges, that's the most interesting thing to me right now.
No, I figured there'd be a question, and we have, our biggest problem, we were in Lemon Valley a little bit on the upper reaches of the Peavine. Our problem is the way, I'll say this very quick, the way the communication backbone is set up on this, we can't always hear stuff from the north. We had a couple instruments, and the only thing worse than no data is partial or confused data, and it just became useless. But things have changed a lot. Back 15 years ago, the only way you could get information out was through expensive two-way cellular phone. Things have changed, so we're looking at, it's not lost on me what's happening, believe me, and I'm trying to see how we can do this economically to get a little more information out from the North Valleys. But I'll be glad, please talk to me afterwards. I'll share anything I have.
Mr. McKenzie?
Thank you, Chairman Smith. Though, looking at your mapping of your reporting sites, it's evident that there's, of course, we've been committed to the Truckee River, and that's the drainage sites that we've primarily got monitoring equipment placed in. To Ms. Herman's point, we don't have any monitoring really in the North Valleys to monitor what's going on up there now, because it wasn't something that this board was concentrating on. We were concentrating on the river flooding and how to monitor that and control that. It's just kind of the pattern I saw from our
Very
map of monitoring.
Correct. We're not totally north. We are a little more focused in Spanish Springs, obviously from the flash flooding there, pre the Griffith Canyon flood detention facilities. Some of this stuff was in before even, I think one of our first instruments was out there before Sparks really completed some of the stuff in '86, one of our first test instruments. So we are a little more aggressive in Spanish Springs, and that's because we can actually communicate the information out. We have to pass everything through Peavine. It sounds simple. It's not as simple as it sounds, as it turns out. But no, I understand, and this has been discussed in our office. I'd have a good idea where we can head, and certainly I work very well with any of the your jurisdictional public works staff, and I'm in communication with them. If they have any thoughts or need, we talk quite often, say, if there's something that's needed, we'll figure out how to help.
And I see in the flooding that we've experienced this year, well, during the January event, we had huge runoff amounts that overtaxed the drainage systems. What's there now, the monitoring wouldn't forewarn us or give us any ability to address that. The type of monitoring we're using for the Truckee River, because the Truckee River is a drainage, and we're monitoring for drainage. We're monitoring how the peak drain to that, and we don't worry about what remains there, because it all runs down to the lake where we'd like to have it. The problem in the basins that Ms. Herman and I deal with is that it comes off the mountain and it stays there, and that monitoring system is probably not something that it would even be feasible for us to be addressing here. Possibly the drainages for the flash floods, but the monitoring that's in those basins is probably something that's more, is something that the local governments ought to be more adapt to, or monitoring more closely than this agency, which has been tasked with the Truckee River, or been working on the Truckee River. Not to say in the future we may not be looking at those areas too, but currently we're concentrated on the Truckee River and the warning for the Truckee River, and trying to address the issues with the Truckee River drainage, and reluctantly the areas that are giving Ms. Herman and myself the most trouble right now are not in the Truckee River drainage. They're in closed basins, And nobody has been monitoring them or treating them like closed basins. They've been treating them like they're part of the drainage, and there's a problem.
Well, like I said, I understand. And yeah, closed basins with playa lakes they're different than what we've been focusing on certainly in the last 25 years. All I ask is your jurisdictions will get together, and if there's something that's needed, it can be integrated into this network, and if it helps them, and certainly I'll be glad to talk with anybody.
So my guess is because we concentrate on the North Truckee Drain area in Spanish Springs, it's because it empties into the Truckee, where the basins in North Valleys do not.
Correct.
So the agenda item says discussion regarding expansion of current gauge systems. Do we need more rain gauges? They look like they're spread out.
I think we're pretty good. Probably, I would say that we probably need to. My goal here today wasn't to come and say, hey, like, I have a laundry list here. You asked what would be good. I think we have some reasonable places to expand over time, and certainly not looking to do it all this fiscal year.
Okay, and that's the rain gauges.
Yeah, I think we will probably look at reinvigorating a couple of sites that are really difficult up in the higher watersheds of Peavine that may be applicable because the sites are there. One, it's not always easy to go just throw a new rain gauge in. Either you have to go seek BLM, a permit on BLM land or private. They both have their issues. Or sometimes we can put them in right-of-ways, NDOT right-of-ways. They have their issues. So I can't get one up and running really quick this year anyway, but we can start throwing the darts at the board, and I do believe we'll add that. I think some of these dots, which are strictly with creek tributary flow, that do enhance our knowledge of the flood inundations from any Truckee River East Side Sierra flood event, are important. We aren't going to get all of them. We're going to try to, I'm going to try to leverage working with the Federal Water Master's Office to gain a little bit more clarity on Steamboat Ditch and a couple of these other ones, and we'll just slowly expand. But I think today is just, yeah, we're not a static system, but I'm also not coming here that I want to see a 50% expansion in the network.
Sure.
I just let you know we're looking at it. I'm listening to everything you're saying, and I'm going to work with your public works staff to see what they need.
And are you continuing to look at flow gauges for the other areas? One question I have, especially the tributaries that come into the Truckee, by the time we've got any information, isn't it almost too late?
I don't think so, Ron.
Okay.
The steamboat's a strange driver,
Okay.
and the North Truckee Drain in '86 can be a strange driver.
Sure.
The only reason, again, as Mr. McKenzie's talked about, and Jeannie, about the Lemon Valley, it's Washoe Lake.
Right.
Without any drain. Washoe Lake's kind of the same problem. There is a slow leak out of it, but it's darn slow out of the headworks at the end. So we can kind of, and if they're dry, this is how Playa Lake works. You know, they're either wet or dry, depending on how much recharge the basin can take. So we can add those back in, something to help. Probably I'm thinking in Lemon Valley is the public works departments get moving forward. They're going to have some sort of profile geometry on the lake. What you do is you start figuring out, get a flow going by a spot that's we think's collecting most of it into Lemon Valley. They'll get a volume and they can start adding. We maybe predict acre footage is going, and again, we're looking at the slope. How fast is the lake filling or not, and then wait for evaporation. I mean, it could be useful. I don't know if I'm answering what you want.
Yeah, you are. Yeah. Mr. LD?
Yeah, I want to jump in here because one thing I didn't hear mentioned is what the cost of one of these stations are. Remember, we have pressure transducers, which they take flow measurements of what's in the river. You have the tipping gauge, which is the precipitation gauge. You can combine these gauges and various components and put them all in the same one. But what I would like to do, number one, ask Ed what the cost of starting a brand new station would be. And then we have a certain amount of maintenance that we have to apply to that during the year.
Okay, there's two. If we work with the USGS right now, it's going to, and they cost share.
Sure.
The ballpark number is probably, and when we're looking at adding Galena Park this year, is probably around $20,000 annually for the O&M.
Okay.
There is a breakdown. They pay 50%, and I got to go look at the numbers, but that's the general gauge, what it costs them to put it in, and then they bill us, and there's some federal cost sharing. If we do it in-house, that you're looking on screen at 85 hundredths of a foot, that's one I maintain for Whites Creek. We can do it. The problem is you're trusting your staff to provide the resolution that other agencies would require, such as the Federal Water Master. It's okay. The instruments are very good, and they do that, but I go out and tell you how fast the water's coming by in the channel, not a USGS hydrographer. That's the trade-off. But I think that's a very good trade-off on these smaller watersheds where we don't need the resolution and the cost of the USGS. So we kind of attack it two ways.
Okay, Mr. Hartnett.
So it's complicated. It could be a little expensive. It could be anywhere probably, let's just say 10,000 to 20,000, depending on who does it for a new site.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Part of the conversation, though, with some of these closed basins does not include, we can talk about rainfall, we can talk about flows in, but it does not take into account groundwater and the rise of groundwater. So the example would be in Washoe Valley, as you have the snow melt up on the hills and it's actually being absorbed down into the ground, and that starts to move down into the valley and it raises the level of the lake, and there's no surface flows necessarily, but you do get high levels of groundwater. Lemon Valley is the same way right now. In Cold Springs, White Lake, all of those, the groundwater is very, very high in those. And so while I understand talking about the rain in specific areas, sometimes we're getting groundwater coming in from outside areas, and some of that can be tough to predict. Would you agree with that, or am I just completely
Oh, I think you're right on. No, this is back in the dark ages when I was in UNR in geology. It was called the scenario of Washoe Lake, of White's Lake, of Swan Lake, Cold Springs. Most of these Great Basin and range valleys are called playa lakes. A playa lake exists when it's full of water. It's because of it's an old term, rejected recharge. All this rainfall, all this snowmelt, at some point has nowhere to go into the groundwater system of an aquifer of a valley. That is exactly what's happening in Washoe Valley. It's happening to every valley up and down the eastern side of the Sierra this year. And once they're full, there's no more attenuation into the groundwater system, and you start seeing these lakes filling up with water. And the more runoff, then the only thing that you have, if you have two ways for it pretty much to go. It either goes into the ground or goes up into the atmosphere through evaporation. We haven't started evap season yet. There's only so much water. Certainly water evaporates much faster in Swan Lake because of the desert terrain surrounding it than someplace like Lake Tahoe. But we'll get some evaporation, but boy, in Washoe Valley, you're gonna have an awful long time where inflow coming in off the mountains from snowmelt is gonna exceed that. So it is gonna be a problem. Now, certainly the resource managers, we like having full groundwater basins. Back when I worked for Water Resources, I see Bill Houck here. You like a healthy groundwater basin. Sure. But there are trade-offs, and especially in a year like this. I'm telling you right now, on one of the instruments we run in this network, we're at 265% of normal on rainfall. That's amazing.
It'll be interesting to see how many septic tanks fail this year based on high levels of groundwater.
I don't want to hear this, Don.
Yeah. We don't deal with that.
I know.
Any other questions or comments?
Interesting.
So I guess the direction would be to continue working with the other agencies on these gauges, and I think it's the program's working well. Unless somebody wants to add anything to it, just continue on what you're doing.
Mr. Chair, we will probably look at each of the separate North Valley watersheds and look at the potential for gauging those and what those costs might be. That's not a real difficult thing for us to do, and we can provide that information in the coming months.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
Okay, we'll move on to number 3. Discussion regarding regional flooding and stormwater issues beyond the scope of the Truckee River Flood Management Project. Who's...
It's my turn on this one. Do you want me to address you from the lectern down there?
Yeah,
or-
why don't you go down there?
Okay. Okay, Jay Aldine for the record. I was originally thinking of how I might facilitate this discussion, and at first I thought maybe I would just let you guys, as the board, start off and pick the issues of greatest concern. But to help you direct your thoughts, what I think I'm going to do is I have 2 simple slides. The first one basically asks the question, Danielle, what can the TURFMA board do to assist the region in the short term? The real opportunities we have in the programs that currently exist is a home elevation program. That home elevation program has some issues that we have to deal with. We more than likely have the authority to extend that program. We would need to go into a little bit more of a legal opinion. Your current legal counsel has discussed this with me, and we feel like we have the authority to move forward with it pending some resolutions. I believe he has already sent a legal memo to each board member on that. The IRS issue still remains, meaning that any money that is given by this agency to a private enterprise or private person would remain income and be thought of as income, and the individual would have to pay taxes on that amount. We could work in tandem with FEMA. If we can get a FEMA grant that will cover 75% or maybe even 80% of the cost of the elevation, this agency then can contribute the other 20 or 25%. The FEMA grant is already exclusive. It does not count as income. So then the only amount that the homeowner would experience as income would be the 25%. But then we have the deal with FEMA. We have to deal with their timetable, and we would certainly be willing to do that. We work with FEMA grants all the time.
Jay, let me ask you a question.
Sure.
On the home elevation program, let's take Lemon Valley. Wouldn't it be true that if we lifted any houses out there at all, they would still be in the floodplain? They couldn't get to their home anyway if it flooded again.
Well, that's the last bullet point. Is this the best solution to a closed lake bed problem? I don't know what the answer is to that question. The scenario that you gave as a condition is exactly the case. As Director McKenzie had indicated, this water hangs around for a long time. There are issues from the health department, whether or not they would even allow a home to be occupied if it was surrounded or even partially surrounded by water. You have a lake bed that has no real treatment. It's shallow. It will warm up during the summer, and it could actually, as the correct word is putrefy, meaning that the organic material that becomes washed into that lake bed could actually go septic, and you could have some problems there. It may or may not be the best solution. I don't know. You also would more than likely have to raise the roads, which this agency could not do under that program.
Okay,
but again, I'm just trying to list the issues that we have to deal with if we go into the home elevation program.
We have another question for you, Jay. Mr. McKenzie.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the two, you kind of touched on a couple of issues. And number one is that you've still got the water there, which means that the home's uninhabitable because all these are septic system homes. So they don't benefit with the ability to stay in their home to begin with. But then the other part of that is that if we expand this home elevation program into the North Valleys for those people up there and make them give them the ability to utilize it, then they also become part of the direct benefit district, and their direct benefit fee would be based upon the same rate as a person that is on the river that's going to be affected by the flood project.
Again, I will remind the board that that will be your decision. I have indicated as staff when I'm discussing this with the public is more than likely the board would extend the direct benefit rate to those participants in the home elevation program. But again, it would be your decision. Again, the notion here is I am trying not to take any kind of position here. I'm trying to give you the facts as I understand them so that you can discuss how you would like to proceed with this particular item, because it could go in a lot of different ways, and I hope I at least address the issues so that you have something to start with. Again, Director McKenzie, you are 100% correct. Septics would fail, that would be an issue. The usefulness of the program could be in question. Now, the only other thing that I could put in this short-term scenario is, are there other available programs? Right now, we don't have a program for property purchases for properties that built in the floodplain and are maybe did not build in the floodplain, but built in a particular area and found out later that they were in a floodplain because maybe the federal government developed floodplain maps, and all of that happened after they built their structures. Again, the other available programs, the purchase program is something that this board will have to take. There's a lot of issues associated with that. Legal counsel will probably tell you that at this point in time, we have a very slim chance to be able to expand any kind of notion like that into the North Valleys. I will not speak on behalf of your council, but I just wanted you to know there are no other programs that we have available that could be used. Now, that is a short-term question. Danielle, could you give me the second slide? Did it freeze up again?
There is no long-term solution. There it is.
There are issues to consider long-term. So what can the TURFMA board do? What can this agency do to assist the region in long-term? The authority would need to extend. We would need the authority to extend beyond the Truckee River that we currently have in our ICA, meaning that we more than likely would require an amendment to the interlocal cooperative agreement that sets up this agency. Your legal counsel will advise you in that area. Each governmental entity has a master plan listing possible projects. I happen to do the one that addressed the Washoe County and the Reno projects. The Sparks projects, I believe I see a Sparks representative here. They have one, and those projects, if any, could be listed as a list of potential projects. It is important to understand that these projects, no priorities have been established for any of these projects. It's also important to understand that no real engineering has been done on any of these projects. For instance, I'll give you an example in Reno. If we were going to, let's say, rework some of the irrigation ditches, there's legal negotiations with each of the ditch companies. There are downstream situations. What happens if we now take and pull water that is stormwater that escapes into the ditches, we put it back into the water course? Does that now flood the lower water system, like to Virginia Lake type of a thing? So the engineering has only been conceptualized. There are no long-term engineering developments. We don't have costs associated with any of these projects, but we know of them. And I know that there's Reno staff here, and obviously we could query the Reno staff and ask them to provide all of those issues as well. But again, I just wanted the board to be aware of the fact that if we went into a discussion and we decided we were going to be magnanimous and do some great work in the various communities outside of the Truckee River. And remember, the irrigation ditches are actually in the Truckee River watershed. So there may be an issue there in separation of the Truckee River project from areas that are not necessarily outside of the Truckee River watershed, but outside of the purview of the planned project that we currently have. And that distinction ought to be made as well during the discussion. With that, I will go back and take my chair. I will certainly be available to answer any of the questions of what I've said here, but I will allow the board and just take copious notes as to which direction you go. We are not agendized for action, but as your director, what I will do is listen to the tenor of the questions, and if it's something that I haven't anticipated, we will research that, and we will be able to provide information on the subsequent board meetings.
Mr. Hartung?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, one of the things that we really do need to talk about, though, Jay, at some point, and I don't want to take us down a road that would breach any contracts that we have with the feds, but I think it's important to look at regional stormwater and how it affects us, not just in the Truckee Basin, but outside. But I don't want to jeopardize any federal funding by doing something that could potentially anger the system.
Well, I can answer that question very easily. Our current flood project is a 100-year flood project that starts somewhere near Mayberry Park, a little bit downstream of that, and it goes all the way past Sparks into the Lower Canyon. The portion of that is governed by the federal project starts at 395 and goes to Vista. It doesn't go into the Lower Canyon. It doesn't go into downtown Reno. So what we are able to do is we, as staff, we distinguish when we deal with the Corps of Engineers, we are specific to the Corps project, which is along the Truckee River. This body will not alter that project. That's a federally approved project by Congress. It is planned by the Corps of Engineers. But what, as your staff, what we can do and what we are doing is we planned improvements in downtown Reno that are completely foreign to the federal project, and those project elements, the Virginia Street Bridge, the Sierra Street Bridge, Center Street Bridge, Lake Street Bridge, those are all projects that we are going to do in-house ourselves with money that we raise that is totally independent of the money that we negotiate with the feds with.
Mr. McKenzie?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Aldina, the irrigation ditches, you brought up a kind of an interesting point that before we could do anything with the irrigation ditches, we'd have to talk to the people that own those ditches.
Oh, you want one of those?
Why aren't the people that own those ditches responsible for maintaining them?
Well, I'm glad I'm an engineer and not an attorney for that response. I don't know. I will say this, back in about 2005 or 6, as a consultant engineer, I did a project over there off of Arlington and Plumas for that drainage that crosses, I believe it's Last Chance Ditch. And we looked at what was happening. So I know precisely what happens with the irrigation ditches from a technical standpoint. But at the time, nobody wanted to open up the ditch contracts and try to deal with that. They were also very afraid of what would happen if we now brought the water back to that particular watershed and how it would impact the lower portions of the watershed as that watershed drains into the north end of Virginia Lake. So I can't tell you. I just know that those issues are always the issues that engineers fail to put enough time to in their estimates, and it takes a lot of talk and a lot of negotiation to be able to get to the properties, get the land, get the ownership ironed out, and all those sorts of things. The engineering is fairly easy and straightforward.
And I see the same thing up in the closed basins in the north, that engineering a solution up there may be a lot simpler than figuring out how you're going to fund it, much like the Truckee River project is. But without having the engineering and having an idea what the costs of that project are, you can't even start looking at how you're going to fund it. So I know that I've asked our staff to look at those issues, and maybe the idea is, rather than having this agency take on that task, maybe having this agency lend their technical assistance concerning flood to the local agencies to help see if we can find solutions up there for future events. I mean, it's here now, and it's too late to plan for something that's already here. So the flood planning for that area is more the concern I have, is the planning of what we're going to do in the future. And it may be 300 years before it occurs again, but it'd be nice if there was a plan when it does.
If I might respond to that comment, because that last comment that you made is extremely germane to this discussion. And again, I don't want this to be director's discussion with you. I want you as a board to deliberate on what you want done. But I will give you an example. Several years ago, Boulder City, Denver area, received a greater than 500-year flood event. Greater than 500 year. We don't even look at greater than 500 year. Some hydrologists put it in the 1,000-year estimate as to the amount of water that they got in that area. So I posed the question, what happens to a community that designs for 100-year and experiences a 500-year event?
You flood.
Well, obviously, the answer is rhetorical here, but the notion
We're going
is...
to flood again, even with 100 years. Sacramento with the 500 year, they're going to flood. Everybody's gonna flood.
And hence the reason why in Sacramento, they've now increased the design level of their levees from 100-year to 200-year. That's not as big of an increase as you might think, but it does increase the size. It gives more freeboard and whatnot. I mention this because the design that was used by the county to design the lake elevation for the North Valley's lakes, Silver Lake, Swan Lake, and others, was a combination of a 100-year volume plus a 25-year volume. And from a logistical standpoint, that's a pretty large storm event. And nobody anticipated 12 small events and what that might do. We are experiencing a water year greater than a 100-year event. So these individuals are experiencing greater than 100-year flooding, and that's just the facts. So I leave that as my final response. I will go back to my chair and then...
I'm going to say something first. We absolutely have to look at these issues. Whether it's us or regionally, the different entities that control those areas. There is an answer. None of it's going to be cheap, and none of it's going to be quick. And I like to point out that in 2008, Sparks put a $5.41 fee onto every resident to pay for the North Truckee drain, and that is being completed now. Phase 3 is up and working on, should be done by spring, next spring, year. End of the year, beginning of next year. Was that popular? No, but it was the right thing to do, and we did it right during the recession. So Sparks has taken as many steps towards helping with the flooding issues as we possibly can, and Sparks is paying for it. Mr. Hartung.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As is Spanish Springs, $9.31
Right.
out of my own pocket, as all my neighbors. So we're right there with you. One thing I would remind everybody about this whole conversation is we've been here for a very short time. 1860s, 1850s maybe, something of that nature. And when people say, this is the wettest year that ever, on record, I would agree with, but because it hasn't happened in our lifetime, doesn't mean anything. It's why you can go 15 or 18 miles from any water source and dig into the ground and find river rock cobble. These kinds of things happen over time, and I think what we're seeing in a lot of these places, this year we have water in the Black Rock Desert. We've never seen it. Years ago, there was water, long before any of us, there was water in the Winnemucca Lake area. So this is it's constantly changing, it's constantly evolving, and it moves around, and it's going to be difficult for us to plan for every single event. That's the bottom line.
Right.
It's impossible. So just keep that in mind, and we'll do the best we can.
Any other comments? Okay, we'll move on to, thank you, Jay. We'll move on to number 4, discussion and update on the status and provisions of Assembly Bill 375, currently pending in the Nevada legislature.
I was going to ask your counsel to do this for the record, Jay Aldine. But I attended the committee hearing yesterday, and I thought I would just brief the board on what had happened. Also take into account the meeting that we had in Reno. Friday afternoon, the Reno City Council met and basically discussed the concepts of the bill that was, before the tax committee. Without getting into a lot of the discussion, the basic motion, I think, tells the story, is the city council voted with one no vote, but they voted to support the bill minus an amendment that was presented by the city of Sparks. That information found its way to Assemblyman Sprinkle Friday evening, and he had decided that what he would do, and these are words from Assemblyman Sprinkle's mouth, because we talked with him after the committee meeting, that he would pull the bill and allow Reno and Sparks to negotiate the terms of that bill. And Assemblyman Sprinkle met with the city manager from the city of Sparks on Monday, and
Hang on, just a minute, Jay.
Real quick, clarification. I thought it was passing the bill on, but then direction to the parties to work something out. He's not pulling the bill,
No,
right?
it was passed on.
it was passed on.
Okay. I heard you say pull
absolutely.
the bill, and I said,
No,
that's not what I was operating. Okay.
That was just me. As I said, I hadn't prepared this one. I was actually going to have council do it, but because I was there, I'm just giving you the gist of the conversations I had yesterday.
Mr. Aldine, I think the correct term is that the amendment was pulled and the bill was passed with some other amendments.
That's what my report is going to be. The amendment was passed with, or the bill was passed with 3 amendments. One had to do with increased number of taxes available for the committee to discuss. The second one was to allow the airport to come in as an ex officio member. And the third one,
I think it was a correction to NAOP's.
oh, yeah,
designation.
spelling
Their name
of,
was spelled wrong.
spelling, yes, it was the correction to the NAOP reference in the bill. The bill passed unanimously to move to the assembly floor, and the Sparks amendment was pulled by the city of Sparks in anticipation of a meeting that we now have
It was
set
not
up.
pulled by the city of Sparks. It was just not allowed into the bill.
Well, I was told,
Mr. Chairman, I understand.
Okay.
we'll just leave it at that. That's
City of Sparks presented the amendment, and it was not accepted.
Hey, your attorney will say that this is all hearsay from me anyway, so at this point in time, that is the update of where the bill stands, and there is a meeting set aside to accomplish the terminology of the bill and to hash out any issues that exist. Assemblyman Sprinkle was very worried that if it didn't pass out of committee, that it would die a death, and he did not want to see that happen, because this is a very important bill to this board and this community. So
then we go visit it at Mountain View?
No, not yet.
yeah, well,
Okay. Any questions or comments for the director? Mr. Bob Zine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just to kind of round out the report, first off, a huge thank you to Assemblyman Sprinkle and all the bill sponsors for carrying the water, if you will, on this bill and being patient with us while we try to get on the same page as to how we're going to move this forward. I can speak as the presiding person over our legislative committee meetings on Friday afternoons when we had this discussion about the bill. Very much the spirit was, let's support the bill to keep it moving, and we'll stay engaged in the conversations to try to accommodate Sparks' concerns. with how this would go forward. So I think there's not a lot of distance between the two cities on this, and I'm confident that we can close the gap quickly. Appreciative of conversations that I know are happening right now, and conversations that will happen, so we can get onto the same page with an amendment and be able to work with our delegation to keep this moving forward.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Thank you, sir. Move on to number 5A, discussion and possible action to approve an amendment to the accord and satisfaction of the agreement for professional consulting services. Mr. Wolves.
That will be Mr. Aldean as well.
Oh,
For the record, Jay Aldean. This one is, this is the regional hydrology model, $1 million that we basically paid to Manhart and then Kimley Horn to complete their hydrology model, and then found out that all we got was, well, it certainly wasn't usable. We then brought before the board, first I took before the subcommittee that deals with modeling and hydraulic issues of the TAC, which includes individuals from Reno, Sparks, and Washoe County, and we discussed what the alternative and what the best possible solution could be. We agreed that they would do a model. It would be a different kind of a model, still be a hydrology model, still be usable for many of the things that we wanted to use it for originally, but it would be done by them on a year basis, and we wouldn't pay them any additional money. So in other words, the consultant would be working for free for a year. That was a difficult thing for them to swallow, and they did. They did give us a submittal. I was able, this is back in October, I used 2 engineering companies to do a review of the submittal, and we found out that the submittal was worthy of acceptance, and it was for a portion of the watershed in our area, not all of the watershed in the regional area. And we gave them comments. They said they would get it done by December, and they were unable to do that. So I said, fine, I'm not going to give you another year, but I will give you 6 more months, because the alternative, if we don't do this, is that we start looking for legal remedies, and on something that we've already spent $1 million on, I'd rather come away with a product that at least I can give to the community, the engineering technical community, and say, here's something. So that is where we are, and this is, again, no dollar extension. It's a 6-month extension so that they can continue to get the items in that they still owe us. They're committed to doing that, and with that, I'll entertain any questions.
questions, comments? Mr. Hartung?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had highlighted fiscal impact none, and pretty much how can this be? What's the potential value of this that they're giving up, Jay?
That's a good question, and that compels me to answer correctly. I think that we could have probably gotten this model.
Mr. Aldean, before you answer that question, I'd like to just ask for a clarification. Are you asking about the impact on our agency or to Kimley Horn?
Well, it's not the impact on our agency, because the fiscal impact on our agency, according to the staff report, is none.
Right.
But there has to be some value of this somewhere along the way. And, Kimley Horn's a great agency, but last time I looked, they're in this business for profit.
They recognize the difficulty in the position that they're in that they did not perform and deliver the final deliverables for the Geisha model that is what the hydrology model that we contracted for.
So you're saying we already paid them?
We paid them,
Yeah.
and they owe us a deliverable, and they couldn't do it. They couldn't make it work. We're not saying that they were late on it. They could not make it work. The model was not, it was poorly applied, and this agency, earlier staff selected a model that was probably not the best model to be used. The modeling subcommittee recognized that fact and said we can use another alternative hydrology model and accomplish 90% of what we wanted to do anyway. That model would have been cheaper to do, certainly, and which goes to answer your question, Director Hartung, is it's certainly less than $1 million than we paid them, but if we can get it for them and they don't bill us anymore, then at least we walk away with a deliverable, and that's better than a long-term lawsuit where everybody loses.
So it should probably say no further impact, because we've already paid them.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mr. McKenzie?
So what's the difference between this modeling and the modeling that we used this year during the floods?
The model that we used during the floods was a hydraulic model, and it's based upon software designed by the Corps of Engineers as it is applied to our region. It's a hydraulic which calculates water surface elevation only. Hydrology estimates the amount of water or flow in cubic feet per second that every particular watershed or water course has. The regional model was developed for, and I don't know, and John, do you remember, did we include the North Valleys in that hydrology model? I don't believe we did. I do not believe that we did. We can expand it. We have staff that could probably do that, but we could expand it into the North Valleys. So the model that we're talking about now is a hydrology or hydrologic model calculating flow. The hydraulic model that we used for the flooding here earlier is a hydraulic model, and it calculates water surfaces only. Small distinction, but big in the terms of...
So does this modeling have predictability so that when we have upstream flow, we can predict the effects downstream?
That's correct. That is the general intent of, one of the general purposes for this model, is to look at development. Director Hartung had mentioned, you get a problem with new development and it causes problems. What we thought as a region would be nice to have is the ability to predict impacts that development of a whole regional area would on the lower portion of a water course. And if we can do that, then we can then condition development in such a way that perhaps the development occurs with very little impact to the lower, already developed urban area.
So this will do modeling on a sunny day for an event?
Well, not for a sunny day. It'll simulate a storm of some kind.
That's what I'm asking. You can stimulate an event or simulate an event through this, and it'll model the effect downstream.
That's correct. And it can be used for development purposes, it can be used for planning purposes, and this model could be extended that if we knew what the rainfall patterns were, and we can get those real time from the Weather Service, we can throw those into the model, input those into the model, run the model, and actually have various water courses figured out. Okay. I mean, the sky's the limit with this, and eventually these two software packages, the one that we're asking for, yeah, more than you wanted to know.
If they ever make it work.
Yeah.
Okay.
More than you wanted to know.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, we're looking for a motion to either extend or not to extend the agreement. That's right, yeah.
I'd move to extend the agreement.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Okay, are you on B also? Okay, B is the KPS3 has provided public relations and communication services to Turfma periodically since June of 2014.
For the record, Jay Aldean, I've been stringing along KPS3 with $25,000 contracts because that's my authority limit on a contract. We're now at the stage where with the legislature, with the new committee that's coming aboard, and with the fact that we now need to do a public service to the individuals of this community, this whole region, Washoe County, and teach them about what we're doing and why this is important. And so with that, I asked Stephanie Cruz, who is here today, if you have any questions for her. I asked her to give me a little bit more of a contract than the contracts that we've been doing thus far. What's the contract amount? $75,000, I believe, not to exceed. Their standard billing, they expend time, they bill us on that time basis, and it's it's one-year contract. Those are the terms of the agreement.
Questions or comments? I think this is important. We've got a big year coming up. We have a motion to approve and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Passes unanimously. Okay, C is presentation discussion of the tentative budget. That'd be Lori. Hi, Lori. Welcome.
For the record, Jay Aldean, it's going to be Lori and Jay. I wanted to the reason why is we're going to be talking about the cash flow of years subsequent to this year's budget, and I wanted to make sure that this board understands that I asked Lori to prepare an austere budget for this year. And when I give the cash flow, they've been handed out the documents. Okay, you have that cash flow. When I give that portion of the presentation, you'll see where I departed from that austere budget.
Push him out of the way, Lori. Yeah.
Good morning, Lori Williams, Senior Financial Analyst for Truckee River Flood Management Authority. As you look through the budget in your packet, you should have actually the regular TRFMA budgets that you're used to seeing and a state copy. I'm going to be referring at one point to the TRFMA, so if you'd have that handy. Yeah, as you looked through it, you probably noticed that it's extremely similar to the budget we have this year. There are a few changes to it, a few little adjustments, things that have been moved from fiscal year 17 over into 18 to accommodate timing. So I will walk through those so that you will see the difference in those. Danielle? So basically, everybody should know that what we try to do is always keep our budgets based on board policy, direction, and objectives. The cash flow that the director has put together and the project scheduling that's been worked on with engineering are all based on the board policy and direction. And the budget is set to follow right in line with those things. So they're all directed by you. This is the tentative budget. We have worked very hard to make this represent what we believe the budget will be for 18. However, between now and May 17th, when we have the hearing, we do have some fine tuning going on in the office. I talked to Washoe County. We have Val Gilmer here from Washoe County. She's our budget analyst for them. We thought there might be an update for payroll and benefits, but it looks like there may not be. So the payroll and benefits may not be changing, but if they are, we'll include that as well. And of course, as the director mentioned later, he's going to be walking through the cash flow. You may see some things in the cash flow that you would like to add to the capital projects budget yourself. So, Danielle, thank you. For the budget year, we've made some assumptions. To start with, revenue for the sales tax is going to be inflated by a growth rate of 5%. We are presently seeing about 7.2%. Salaries and benefits are based upon Washoe County estimates. We have reviewed those, and we can verify all the costs. We have no problems with the salaries, and the standard benefits look fine to us too. As far as expenditures, I've kind of lumped them together here in a total. If you add the expenditures for general fund and the capital projects fund for fiscal year 18, we're right at $8.9 million. If you compare that to our current budget, that is less than, it's a reduction of about 25%, and that is a reflection of the austere budget that the director has asked we start with. so that you can have your influence on it with possible additions. Part of that, aside from the capital projects, is professional services. And if you compare professional services, it's about $1 million less in fiscal year 18 than 17. And that's mainly because there's a settlement model in fiscal year 17. And in the last week or two, we have realized that that actually is going to be part of the flood project itself. So that will come in later as a capital project item. So we've removed that from our budget. A few more assumptions. We've talked about sales tax. We do have a FEMA grant. You heard about that, I believe, in February. We will be starting that FEMA grant at the end of this, close to the end of this year, and it will overlap and complete at the beginning of next year. That'll be taking down the Excel building. So we have worked in the costs of the demolition and the FEMA grant revenue in the estimated current year and the budget for next year. The capital projects for the current year have been put on hold. You'll notice when we get to the financial statements in a few moments that the capital projects financial statements show there's really been no activity. That's been on hold so that the money that we might have spent this year can be saved for starting up the initial tasks for the phasing of the construction. Now, this is where I would, just if you're interested, point you to the TURFMA internal budget document. There's a line that says Capital Projects Fund, and just 2 lines above that, it says fiscal year net change. I want to talk about this line because basically what happens here is what's going to influence starting the budget for next year. It's going to influence the beginning balance. When you look at that line, you'll notice at the far left, the budget for fiscal year 17, we budgeted to actually be deficit spending for the year to the tune of about $5 million. If you move over 2 columns to where we're projecting what we will actually do as of June 30th, we're going to be adding about $5.6 million to the bottom line. So that's quite a swing. $10.1 million is quite a bit. But we have listed here the things that are occurring in fiscal year 17 that push that money over into 18. First of all, transfers out. Since we did not do any of the capital projects we had budgeted, we don't need to transfer that $5.5 million to the capital budget. That will stay in general fund. There's half of the 10.1 right there. The core review, we have $1.75 million set aside for the core review. And as you know, the Corps has not been knocking at the door to have us send them the money yet. So we're going to push that to next year as well. Total revenue, we did have we've talked about it, but it was not included in the budget at that time. We did have let me start over again. Washoe County did refinance the flood debt, and it created quite a savings to our debt service. So a large chunk of that is reflected in the increase in total revenue. I mentioned earlier the settlement model. We've taken that completely out of our budget because it will come back in down the road as part of the phasing budget. And consultants and so many things related to the rate and to the possible additional revenue streams that we may be introducing down the road, and some of the engineering that we haven't done as yet, that's reflected in the consultants. So you can see, starting at the -5 million budget and then working through all those changes, that's how we got to the addition of 5.5 million at the close of this year. So that basically affects how we start our budget year. Next.
Any questions so far?
Do you have a question?
I'll wait until we get
Okay.
to the end then. Just on your page 2, it's okay, I'll wait till the end, Lori.
Okay.
Keep going.
Okay, all right. So with the $5.5 million being added to the fund balance, you can see we're planning to start fiscal year 18 with $17.8 million. We had the revenues, I've already talked about the sales tax and the growth rate. Salaries and benefits, they are virtually unchanged from the current budget. They're just 1.5% higher than what was budgeted for the current year. So services and supplies, they're within the same range as fiscal year 17, except for the $1 million for the sediment model. And the current capital projects budget, with what we have in it, will require $3.3 million to be transferred to capital projects, so that's there. So total expenditures and uses of $8.8 million. That will leave us with an ending fund balance June 30th of 2018 of $18 million in the general fund.
It looks like our revenues have gone up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's because of the debt service.
Yeah.
The debt service went down, so the revenue went up.
Okay.
And taxes went up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Capital Projects Fund, to this point, before construction, we're trying to keep everything we can into the general fund so that we keep our flexibility of those dollars. We started the fund balance at the beginning of the year. We're anticipating to start the fund balance at the beginning of the year with $7,000. We're going to be adding revenues of $127,000. That includes the FEMA grant of about $112,000, plus reimbursements and interest that we get during the year for that fund. Totals the 127. Transfers in the 303 I mentioned earlier. And the projects that we currently have in the budget: our home elevation for $500,000. The Reno Sparks Indian Colony Landscape Program is $13,000, which actually you don't see it because it's summarized, but there's a reimbursement from Walmart for that same $13,000 up in revenue. They have a partnership in that program.
Is this on the other side of the flood wall, on the riverside, or on the other side? Is that what we're
It's-
talking about?
The Walmart
Yeah, is it?
levy,
So it's on the Walmart side of the levee. Okay, that's all I want to know.
which side of the levy is that landscaping that we're doing with the Reno Sparks Indian Colony on?
Yeah, it's Eric Sheets, for the record, managed that project. It's the riverside.
Oh, it is the riverside.
Which would be the north side of the levee
Okay.
and flood wall.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Aaron. And to continue on, demolitions of $400,000, that is Excel, and we have the budget in there for bristlecone in case that actually is approved so that we can go ahead with that. Flood project, the environmental steps as far as the initial work, the initial tasks, that we have $2.5 million in there. That's for environmental work and any kind of related engineering that might go along with that. So that's just the first step. Now, the director will be presenting other possibilities that you can add on to that to ramp that up or expand that or whatever. So you'll be talking more about that in a few moments. Total expenditures, $3.4 million, and the ending fund balance for the Capital Projects Fund as of June 30th, 2018 is $20,774. So that's a general overview of TURFMA's General Fund and Capital Projects Fund tentative budgets. If you have any more questions about the
Questions or comments for
presentation
Lori?
or any of the detail, I'd be happy to answer
Mr.
them.
Hartung?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Lori, I'm not trying to bust your chops here. Just a couple of questions. On page 2 of the preliminary budget, we've got lab testing. What are we testing?
Those are samples taken out of the river, and they're sent out for testing. Danielle and Ed work on those.
Okay?
Do you know more information?
What are we testing for? I'm just curious. We're a flood agency. We're, what?
I will defer to Danielle.
Yeah, Danielle Henderson, Natural Resource Manager, for the record. Commissioner Hartung, so we have invested as an agency some funds to restore some of the properties downstream along the Truckee River. And as part of that work, we're interested in how those projects are functioning. And so we, in cooperation with a whole bunch of other agencies, are collecting some water quality samples at those sites to see if the projects that we've implemented are functioning well over time. So one of the goals of those projects was to improve water quality, and so that's what we're measuring.
Okay, okay, thank you. Under repairs and maintenance, does that have to do with, say, the levees, or are we talking about the Flick Ranch stuff?
Yeah, it's basically more related to the properties. It's landscaping at some of our properties. We have to
Okay.
keep the landscaping at least decent.
I just wanna,
And,
you know, I mean-
repairs to to bristle cone and.
Repairs to bristlecone.
To Excel. There also is the janitorial service at our office,
Okay.
those kinds of things.
Okay, yeah, those are two things I'd love to see us get out from underneath at some point, bristlecone and Excel. Printing, we have, you know, a small amount, but then we also have for copy machines. So I'm just trying to understand what kinds of things do we print that we wouldn't just make copies of?
If we needed to have large volumes done, notebooks, those kinds of things,
Okay.
it's more cost-effective to send that out and have it done rather than staff try to do that.
Okay, because I know we have a fairly large budget for copying. $37,500 for website?
Website.
I looked
Yes.
at our website. I'm not that impressed. I'll do it for
It's
$37,500.
currently in operation, and you'll notice it's $37,500 for the current year. And at this point, we've only spent $6,000. It's being done in-house as opposed to farming it out. We were going to contract it
tell.
out and have it done.
Yes.
And so it's working
I'm not trying
along.
to be mean. It was just,
No.
it's very basic. It's not, that's not
Well,
tough. I
that's
mean, we
that's
could-
not the website we're producing. That's
Okay.
the old one. So,
Okay.
and
If
if
I
you look
could-
at the website fee budget for 18, it's significantly less than 37,000. It's because we have expertise in house and it's being done that way.
And then network and data lines, we've got 21,000, and then on another place, we have the same 21,000. Is that going to charter?
Yes.
Okay.
Danielle?
Thank you. If I could just make one clarification on the website. I am working in concert with a web developer, and we are updating our severely outdated website.
It is outdated.
We are actually hoping to go live next week. We've had a few delays in that process, but the new website looks very nice. It features our new logo and lots of professional photography, and it should be very easy to navigate for homeowners, business owners, and agency folks.
Well, and
So-
I'm hoping we can incorporate some flyovers with drones. I know a fine young man who can take care of some of that stuff for us, and I'm sure he'll give us a great rate. One last question. What's our rental income? What are we renting out, other
That's-
than Jay?
The rental income? We have a lease with Tumwa where they actually access a water source on one of our properties.
Okay, I see. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, any other questions?
Yes.
Ms. Herman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I noticed on here, Hidden Valley Home Elevation Program, and since, we've been talking about that, how many homes I don't know if you can answer this or not, but how many homes did that involve?
Actually, I can. We've done one.
Okay, and that
But
would,
we have a number of other people, let's see. We have, actually, I can tell you. Oh, no, I can't, because it's rolled into a summary number. But we have a number of people that have deposits with us who are interested in doing it. It's just with the IRS issue, where they have to be taxed on the full amount that we grant them. They have not been, it's my understanding, and correct me if I'm off base, but they have not been as interested yet to come forward to take advantage of that opportunity.
so, one more question. So how much does it cost for one home to be elevated?
Now, that is beyond me, but I know
Okay.
we spent about $125,000 on the one that we did do.
Jay Aldine for the record, I generally give a range of about 150 to about 200 and a quarter to elevate most standard three-bedroom homes with a cement slab. or even a not, or a raised slab as well, or a raised foundation as well, so.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Okay, any other questions? Do we need to, are you done? Are you done?
Now I will pass it off to the director.
Okay. Thanks, Lori.
Okay, get all your old jokes and out of the way first for me. I wasn't going to do a cash flow this year, but as I started looking, and we really have, if any year, this is probably the most important cash flow decisions you will
And you
make.
are?
Jay Aldine, for the record. If you're not tired of this mug yet, I don't know what else I can do. So what I did is I completely revamped the cash flow spreadsheet that I'd done in the past, and I modeled it after the presentation and the example that you got in the budget. So you have a general fund portion, a capital fund portion, you have transfer out, and then transferring in. Those are done to basically simulate exactly what you've seen. So if you're used to looking at the budget, then this should make a lot of sense to you. The one difference that I did do is what Ms. Williams did not do is I separated the sales tax from the debt service on that upper row. So under beginning fund balance under the general fund, you see two lines. One is a estimate of taxes and the other is the estimate of debt service. And you can follow where the debt service right now, last year it was 2.1 million. This year it's 1.2 million. Next year 1.4 million basically, 1.4 in 19, but it starts to go back up to 2.2 and 20, and you can see where now the debt service is going to catch up with us. We got a little bit of a reprieve for this year, or 2017, this year and the next year or two, but then it catches back up with us. The thing that's important in this cash flow is not so much the various intricacies of it. It is down in the capital projects section. Before I go there, I wanted the board to see the second page in my handout. That is, it's titled TURFMA Downtown and Truckee Meadows Flood Project Phasing, Schedule, and Cost. It shows the projected engineering, construction, and time frame for building the Truckee River Flood Project. You will recall that last year I brought a contract before you to have HDR relook at the unit costs and also give us a projection on how long it would take to build the project. This is a draft graph out of their report. Their report has not been given to me yet, but they gave me this, and the important thing is it shows, if you look at the very top row, when you see the year 2017, 18, and 19, 20, and 21, you see that there is a series of baseline surveys that are, in essence, environmental permit negotiation, and then down a couple of rows, you see Truckee Meadows Reach, 60% design, and that's broken up over a 3-year period, roughly $15 million there. So what I did, instead of having this listed as part of the budget that Lori is presenting to you, she only presented a $2.5 million hit to the budget for doing permitting and some minor engineering. I am showing under items, if you go back to the first page, that summary sheet, if you look under capital project, items 10 and 11, you will notice that I have put in a full $2 million for permitting and $4.5 million for design. And I included that for FY19 and FY20 as 2020 as well. The fact, and I'm not trying to pull any wool over anybody's eyes, if the citizenry of this county votes this project down, some may say then this money is wasted in the long run. The way I look at it is that all these project elements eventually will be built, so doing the design now is not a far-fetched idea, but it also, and I will remind you what the school district did. The school district came out with a huge project to revamp Devaney High School, and if we don't start the engineering now and start the permitting now, that by the time the vote comes around, we will not be ready to implement any projects quickly out of the, it'll still take us probably a year to implement any big projects. And hence the reason why I also included in this cash flow, you'll look at items 12 and 13. That means we start some engineering for the Well Street removal, the bridge removal, and then the pedestrian replacement would come in 2019. And I also started the notion of number 14 and number 15, which is the common features concept. Remember, common features project, if we do it with the Corps of Engineers, it will be some project element in the central portion of our project from 395 to Vista. And it's called common features, meaning that the features are common to the 50-year plan that the Corps authorized through Congress and our 100-year plan that we want to build. And the feature of that is if the Corps commits to doing that, they will get money appropriated, and that means our project gets a start, and it guarantees that we will get the money, the $180 million that we are right now only approved for by Congress. So there are three separate elements of this cash flow. Oh, I also, on number 2, I increased the home elevation program from $500K to $750K, thinking that we could maybe do another couple of home elevations if the board entertained that notion. Obviously, we can take it back down. All these numbers can be removed, and as Lori has presented them to you. But the thing that's important, and I would like direction on, is whether or not this board would like to increase the current budget or the planned budget for FY18 to include the 60% preliminary design starts, the full $2 million of permitting that I would like to have, not just $2.5 million to cover permitting and design. Remember, permitting and requires that you have some design so that you can discuss permitting issues based upon some kind of a design. So the $2.5 million is only a portion of what I need. I really truly need about $6.5 million in order to start with, and I need to continue that all the way through for the next couple of 3 years. So I would like the board to give me a nod as to whether or not they would like staff to do that or not. And if they tell us to do that, then we will expand the current capital projects as was presented by Ms. Williams to include these other 3 or 4 elements that I've listed here. And with that, I am done.
For me, Jay, I think that the preliminary design and everything, that's fine. We need to be ready if it does pass in November of 18. The ones I question are 12 and 13, the Wells Avenue, because we are looking at redoing the spaghetti bowl, and that'd be included in that whole mix. So we need to look at that in a couple of years to see exactly where that process is, because they might be doing all that.
I am perfectly willing to do that. There is a hydraulic benefit by removing the existing wells.
Okay.
That one that's down there at the bottom that people just walk across, it's not used vehicular at all. And I just put it in there to show that there was a project that we could be ready for immediately.
Sure.
Which, again, part of
I
the...
still want to go down and change it and then have NDOT come in and have
I
to
am
do it over again.
I am perfectly willing to do that. Again, I'm working on advice that perception is important. I'm an engineer and I don't understand the public all that well. And so the perception is very important that we are ready. So we can do the preliminary and get that moving, and then we will be ready fairly
And
quickly
we'll see what
after a
the
vote.
board's appetite is, but that's just mine. Mr. Hartung?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the preliminary design and the engineering, how much of that is already done, Jay? Didn't we have a bunch of preliminary design as far, just, and I'm not talking about all of the beautification projects that were added to the original flood management project. I'm talking about the original design for this corridor.
We are somewhere between 20 and 30% design right now. We would then elevate the current design that was developed by HDR Engineering to a full 60% design. If you ever do any work with NDOT sets right away at 60%. They don't want to be buying property that could change significantly, and in 60% we have a good project footprint, and therefore we know precisely we can start ordering surveys for doing right-of-way acquisitions and things of that nature. So we're currently, to answer your question, Director Hartung, we are currently between 20 and 30%, which is a preliminary estimate, sufficient for a preliminary estimate that you have now.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? Mr. Bobzien?
Just the one, Mr. Chairman, and on the Wells Avenue piece, I don't have the benefit of serving on RTC to know, but my understanding, just given my preliminary meeting with NDOT folks on the Spaghetti Bowl was, I mean,
We're a couple years.
this particular way, we're a couple years away, but I think also this particular piece of Wells Avenue, I didn't get the sense that it was even going to be close to being part of that project. I don't know. You may know more than I do. I do know it's in my head because during the flood events, I went down to this particular location and was wondering, like, boy, this is really, this is the next bath plug.
Well, just a short, on the NDOT part of it, the Spaghetti Bowl is not just 580 and we're 80 intersect. So it's going to actually come from the Center Street on-ramp in Reno and extend into Sparks, and then, of course, going up 395. So it's all inclusive. I don't know if this is in there, but we've got time to figure that out, because you're not talking about that till 19, right? We've got at least a year.
Right, we do.
Okay.
We do, and we can, but the design would need to start. We can put this off at the board's, desire. The notion was the goal was here to provide a project that had, one, some real hydraulic benefits, and as enumerated by Director Bobzien, that there are that's a definite choke point. Number two, it's a project that we could quickly do. In fact, if we have to get ready and do it very quickly in a year, we could probably do that. It's so easy to do.
And I ask you to do that, any low-hanging fruit, because we do have some money in the bank right now. So.
That is the low-hanging fruit.
Okay. We need to get going here. We have a funeral at 11 o'clock that we have to attend. So any other questions or comments?
Again, I would be looking for any direction from the board as to how many of these elements to include in the FY18 budget.
Mr. Chair, Mike Walls, General Counsel, we are not agendized to vote on the cash flow today.
They're not. That's what I said. I'm asking for
To the
direction
sense it's any
on.
direction, it can't be a vote. If certainly any board member could express their opinion on that, but.
Okay,
it would not be a
and what
vote.
we can do is just say bring it back as is. In May, when we talk about the tentative budget.
The specific question, all this was prepared for was, do you want us as staff to include these other
Bring it back
projects
as is.
in the FY18 budget that Lori just did?
Bring it back as is, and we can take it out or leave it in May when we do the tentative budget.
As I have shown, or is
Yeah,
it?
just as it
Okay.
is right now.
That's all
Mr.
I need.
Chairman, just, and real quick on that, if there can be just a quick check-in with NDOT, just to kind of understand. I mean,
Yeah.
and they may tell you, we don't know at this time, and that's fine. And at least we
that's
know
probably
that.
what
Right,
they'll
that's
say,
probably what
yeah.
they'll say, but just to kind of see how close we are with this Wall Street into their project scope.
Easily done.
Okay. So let's go back to C. Lori, do you have anything else to add? Should we go ahead and approve your, is that what you're looking for the approval to continue?
Yeah, just accept it so I can
Accept
move on
report, and we'll
send
see
it
it
to
in
the
May.
state. Yeah.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Passes unanimously. Thanks, Lori.
Thank you.
And then we'll move to D. That's,
The monthly financial reports.
yeah, let's do that.
And you actually have January and February before you, and just for time's sake, I will just, of course, point you to February. I would like to tell you that all budgets are on point. As you know, we're going to actually have more budget available because we are not spending all of it. I will, just for the sake of illustration, send you to the third page of February, which is the Capital Projects Fund Statement of Revenues, Expenditures, and Change in Fund Balance. I think that's a good place where you can see that all of the capital projects that we have budgeted have been put on hold, and really the only activity we have are those related to the Indian Colony Landscape Program.
Okay.
If you have any questions related to either month, I'd be happy to answer them.
Questions, comments? Okay, looking for a motion to accept the report.
So moved.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Thanks, Lori. Okay, we'll move on to 6, working group report and possible action to provide direction to staff. Is there any working group? Danielle, do you have a report?
You have the report before you in your packet, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, any questions for Danielle? Seeing none, looking for a motion to accept the report.
Motion to accept.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? 2, 3, 4. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. We still, just checking to see if we still have a quorum. Board member comments, requests, and future agenda items. Mr. Hartung?
Just wanted to correct myself, thinking about my blood pressure. Sphygmomanometer is a blood pressure cuff. It's an anemometer. Started thinking about this, thinking about my blood pressure recently. Doctor tells me
Calm down.
I have none.
Yeah. Gotta have a heart.
You gotta have a heart first, that's right. Mine is if I had a brain like
Yeah,
Gino.
only if I had a, yeah.
If I only had a brain. Thank
Any
you.
other board member comments or suggestions? Okay, I will open up the public. Anybody in the public wishing to speak at this time? See none, we'll bring it back to the authority, and without objection, we are adjourned. Thank you.